Ever since I started using Affinity Photo's procedural texture filter, there's one thing that's been eluding me, and that is vectors. I could see the examples, I sort of knew how to use them. I know about vectors because I've got some background in physics and computer science, but there's just something weird about how they behaved. And I continue to search for references on those vectors. And the first thing I came to was something called shaders. And I thought, shaders, those look sort of interesting. And I'd heard of shaders maybe briefly before, and I knew they had something to do with Blender, but I never really had any experience with shaders. So I started searching around for more information on shaders. And then I came across the OpenGL shading language specification. And that had a detailed explanation of vectors, and I noticed that the way it was used was very similar to the way that vectors are used in Affinity Photo's procedural textures. So then I went and learned more about shaders and found out that, well, in some ways, the procedural texture filter is a type of shader. The procedural texture filter can't do everything that shaders can do, but it also contains more advanced functionality than you'll find in a typical shader. So there's advantages and drawbacks. For instance, the shader language can have subroutines and control structures like for loops, and you can't do that with procedural textures. On the other hand, procedural textures have access to all of the other functions, especially if you use them as a live filter, they have access to all of the other functions that you'll find in Affinity Photo. So it's a little bit of a mix of that. Now, if you look up shaders on YouTube or out on the internet, you'll find a lot of references for them, and I'm going to give you some references in the description for this video. But I'm going to go over some introductory shader concepts. I've only recently learned about shaders, so it may be a little rough, but here we go. A shader is able to access the graphic card on your computer, and the graphic card on your computer can operate in a massively parallel mode. Your graphics card can control every pixel in the region of the image in parallel. So I created an image over here that's 1024 by 1024, and I'm going to do some typical shader applications with this. So the first thing I'm going to do is, let's say I've colored it in, I have it selected, I'm going to choose the procedural texture tool. I'm going to create a new preset, and the first thing I'm going to do is to create a variable. I call it UV, that's typical shader language, and I'm going to set that equal to a vector 2 of x and y. And then I'm going to show UV on the screen like that. So it's all red. I'm also going to select the green channel, so now it's yellow. But now I'm going to take this and divide it by W. Okay, so this is a very shader thing to see. When you first learn about shaders, this is one of the first things you create. So the X component is you're scaling this divided by W, so this is going from 0 to 1 as the X goes from 0 to 1, and that's being assigned to the red channel. Then the Y component is starting up here at 0, going down to 1 down here with the green channel, and then where they mix, they make yellow down here at 1, 1, it makes the yellow channel. So that's sort of the basis of the shader, but that's sort of one of the simplest things you can do. It's sort of the hello world of shaders. I'm going to go on and make a simple shape using shader methods. first thing I'm going to do is put in an a variable as a real number. I'm going to multiply by a, set that equal to 1. Now if I start bringing this up, it just makes this smaller. But what I can do is I have this function fraction, and so if I take the fraction of the UV vector, apply that, I get this array of repeating images. Okay, so it increases. So that is a typical shader operation, is you can repeat this image over and over like that. The length of UV will create sort of a circular pattern. Right now it's off to the side. So to move that to the center of the screen, I need to subtract 0.5 from my fraction, minus 0.5, like that. Okay, now let's put the circle in the middle of the screen. Okay, so this is going from 1 up to somewhere around 70%, I think. But I want it to go, for what I'm going to do, I want to make a ring. Okay, and so I'm going to have this, I need to have this go below 0. So I'm going to first multiply this by 2. And then I'm going to subtract off some number. I'm just going to call it b. And I'm going to set that up as a slider. And so I can control the size of that circle by sliding this up. And notice they're all changing at the same time. That is so cool. Okay, so I'm going to take the absolute value of this, like that. Now I have that ring that's changing like that. And now I can take this and I'm going to take 1 minus it. So now I have a bright ring. I'm going to add 2 0 to 1 inputs. I'm going to call them E1 and E2. I'm set this one down to 0, leave that one at 1. Now I'm going to enclose this in a smooth step function. Smooth step, parentheses E1, comma, E2, comma, and then put a closing parentheses over here, like that. So it looks like that, but if I bring this up and bring this down, I can create a ring shape. Okay. There are libraries of different shapes available where people have figured out how to make all kinds of different shapes. And I'm going to put a couple of references in the description for the video on some of those shapes. So this is all I'm going to do for now, but in some future videos I'll show you more. I'm going to spend a few videos just looking at the shader functions of Affinity Photo's procedural texture filter. Let me know if you have any comments or questions, and thanks for watching.